RACHЫL, a novel by Jeanette Huffman. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, places, events, and incidents are either the products of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. Prologue. Before there were houses, there was the land. Before there were names, there were things that had no need for them. The woods did not begin when people first walked into them, nor did they become anyone's simply because someone drew a boundary and claimed them. The trees were already there, their roots buried deep in soil that had been turned, fed, and disturbed long before the first settlers believed they had discovered it. People came anyway. They always do. They arrived with tools, faith, and the conviction that land could be understood if it was cleared, measured, and shaped correctly. They felled what they could, burned what they couldn't, and built homes in the spaces that remained, convinced the world ended at the limits of their own understanding. They were wrong. The woods never resisted them. Resistance would have implied urgency, and urgency belonged to creatures bound by time. The forest neither fought nor surrendered. It simply endured, watching generations arrive, believing they had changed a place that had scarcely noticed them at all. There were stories, of course. There always are. They passed quietly from one generation to the next, usually after dark, and usually among people who had lived there long enough to recognize that certain places carried a weight they could never quite explain. They spoke of figures glimpsed between the trees that disappeared when approached, voices that sounded almost familiar, but never resolved into anyone who could be named, and moments when the air itself seemed to shift, as though another presence had entered the space beside them. Most people dismissed those stories. They called them imagination, isolation, or the natural result of too much silence and too little distraction. That explanation was easier, safer. Not everyone accepted it. The women rarely did. The old women used to say women heard certain things more easily than men. Whether that was true or merely another story depended on who was telling it. They never tried to define what lived beyond their understanding. Naming a thing invited argument, while acknowledging it required only humility. They accepted its existence the way a farmer accepts an approaching storm, not because it could be explained, but because experience had taught them not to ignore it. They understood that the land had never belonged to them, just as nothing truly belongs to anyone for very long. Whatever shared that place with them did not dwell beneath the soil or within the roots of the trees. It existed in the unseen spaces between ordinary things, close enough to notice, impossible to hold. So they did not speak of it carelessly. They understood that attention was invitation. Once it noticed you, forgetting became impossible. Time moved as it always does. The town grew. Roads cut through the hills. Fences divided fields, and generations passed through the same houses believing permanence could be built from timber and stone. The woods changed very little. People did. Forgetting became another way of surviving. It allowed them to raise children, celebrate weddings, bury parents, and convince themselves that whatever earlier generations had feared had either vanished or never existed at all. But forgetting has never erased anything. It only makes recognition more difficult when it finally returns. Sometimes it arrived as the faint conviction that the world had shifted ever so slightly out of place. Other times it found expression through people who were never chosen, never marked, only available. They noticed too much. They sensed patterns no one else could see. They stood just a little too close before realizing the darkness was capable of looking back. They were never the beginning. They were only the place through which it passed. Hollow Creek was never special. That was the truth people found hardest to accept. Places like it exist everywhere. Small towns built on old ground where generations convince themselves they understand the land simply because nothing has yet forced them to question it. Hollow Creek had only become easier. The hills had been cleared, the forest divided, The earth cut open and claimed by people who believed ownership changed the nature of a place. It never did. Long before the first house stood there, another presence already called those woods home. It neither slept nor waited. It simply remained, and eventually someone always came back.